Hi guys, it's Rory here. Just wanted to leave a quick note to say that if you enjoyed last week's episode and want to keep up to date with the content that we release every week, please remember to follow or subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or whichever platform you're listening to us on. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify specifically, please also remember to leave us a review. It means a lot to us and does wonders for pushing our podcast in front of new listeners every week. Once you've done that, leave a comment on Spotify or come and join us on X, BlueSky, or Instagram and let us know that you've left a review. It means a whole lot to us and we'll make sure that we get in touch with you to say thank you. Thank you once again for listening. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce. Today I've got the pleasure of being joined by Emmanuel de Valle. Emmanuel, thank you very much for coming on the show. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. It's great to have you on the show finally. Emmanuel is the person who administrates and I guess leads the FlamengoAlternativo account on X, as well as Flamengo History. That means today we are going to be speaking about all things CR Flamengo, one of Brazil's greatest and most successful football clubs, from the perspective of not just a supporter, but someone who is also a historian of the club. Just before we start things properly, Emmanuel, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your role within football.
Thank you, Rory, for the invitation. I'm glad to be here to talk about my club in English. It's a very new experience to me, so I hope it all goes fine. I'm a Flamengo fan since I was a kid. You know, my father is also a fan. It's brothers and most of my family are too. Flamengo is the biggest club in terms of fans in Brazil. It goes around 40 million fans in the country. The country itself has about 200 million. And Flamengo has, just like some other clubs, a few other clubs in Brazil, has a very national group of supporters. You know, it's not exactly a local experience. So it's all over the country, the supporters. And some people even claim that Flamengo fans from other states are not just Flamengo fans. They are supporters of local clubs and Flamengo. But it's not true necessarily, because many people from other states in Brazil, and Brazil has 26 states plus the federal district, which is Brasilia, the capital. In almost all of them, Flamengo leads in the number of fans. So it's a very national experience, you know. People from different regions of the country know what you're talking about when you're talking about Flamengo. So it's a widespread experience, you know.
Yeah, it's a culture in and of itself, I think. I mean, just to give our listeners a bit of an idea about the sheer scale of what Emmanuel has been talking about. You know, we kind of touched on this, I suppose, on our episode on Bengaluru FC a couple of weeks ago. Flamengo, as Emmanuel mentioned, is the most popular football club in Brazil. There is an estimated 47 million fans of the club, which is equivalent to roughly 20% of Brazil's population, which is absolutely insane. It's one of two football clubs to never have been relegated from the top division, Serie A, in Brazil, along with Sao Paulo FC. There are at least 5 or 6 rivalries which the club can claim due to their historic success, and they have a list of trophies longer than the Channel Tunnel. It's just incredible the types of things that this football club has done, and as Emmanuel has alluded to there, it's really not just a football club. It's very much a way of life. I think that much should be obvious, but it's also an entirely different part of Brazil's cultural heritage, because Flamengo is the national team of Brazil. Do you know what I'm trying to say? It's the clubs that represent Brazil in the club scene and in club football, which is just absolutely insane. I mean, again, the scale of this is just absolutely incredible.
Well, it is. You're right about that. There are many clubs who had a big fan base in Brazil. But some of them are strictly in their states, you know, within their states. But Flamengo is a different experience because it's a few other clubs too, mostly Rio clubs, because Rio was the capital of Brazil until 1960, before Brasilia was constructed and built up and turned to be the capital. But since the start of the century, the 20th century, everything that happens in Rio used to sound all over the country, you know. In football, it's all about that too. So Rio clubs have spread the influence all over the country through the decades. Today, it's more like Sao Paulo clubs have done it about that too. But Flamengo keeps doing it nationally, you know. Since the start of researches about fan bases, Flamengo has been the leading club in Rio and usually the leading club in Brazil too. So It's a very big experience to be a Flamengo fan. And there's another thing too. Flamengo is a club already tied to a kind of Rio thing, the behavior of people, and people like to party, to celebrate. That stereotype of Brazilian people, and especially from Rio, it's all been, until very recently at least, something that deeply founded in Flamengo too, all over its the history.
Yeah, and the supporters are known for producing a massive party and carnival atmosphere as well. And
Yes.
like you said, that's very much linked with the identity and the culture of Rio as well. There's so many places that we can start here, and a lot of it also can be, I guess, tied to other clubs within Brazil, because Flamengo started as a rowing club.
Yes.
And it was the same as Corinthians in Sao Paulo. But I think we also need to speak a little bit about the context of football in Brazil, both now and in the early years, because from a European perspective, we kind of work on the fact that we are from very small countries comparatively, and we have one national league. But Brazil has a number of state leagues. Then they have the Serie A, which is the national league, and they also have different tournaments. So tell us a little bit about how Brazilian football operated in the early years, but how it operates now. I think that would be a good place for us to start, Emmanuel.
Football came to Brazil at the very end of 19th century. There's some dispute about who brought it to the country and where it really started. The most accepted theory talks about a student from Sao Paulo named Charles Miller, who went to study in England. A lot of wealthy families used to do that in Brazil at that time, send their kids to study abroad, to study in England. And then they came back with things they seen, the things they learned in British culture, And one of these things was football. But at the turn of the century, at the start of 20th century, the most popular sports, so to speak, in Brazil were rowing and horse racing. And football was really a kind of elite thing, something like a few people, mostly related to British community, knew about, played. It was not as widespread as it now. But at around 1910s, things started to happen in Brazilian football. And even the rowing clubs started to have football sections. They call it esportes terrestres, which is ground sports, And many clubs in Rio were born as rowing clubs. Flamengo in 1895, Botafogo in 1894, and then the football section, the football club, was born in 1904, and then they mixed up in the 1940s. Vasco da Gama started as a rowing club in 1898 and just went to football in around 1916. But the league got underway around 1906 in Rio.
Okay.
In Sao Paulo, it's a little bit earlier. It's 1902. But Rio and Sao Paulo as the most important cities, Rio as the capital at the time, so it was far more important at the time, But Sao Paulo was also a leading place in Brazil. So it was the two places in which football grew faster and became really strong within the Brazilian game. And it has been, it went to be like this for the first half of the century as a whole. Just around the late 1950s, the 1960s, that other states came about to play a bigger part in the national game. It was very restricted to Rio and Sao Paulo. So Brazil has now 26 states plus the federal districts, and each state has its own history in football. And given its continental size of the country, it's very hard to imagine in the early 20th century a national competition. And we scarcely had planes. You can't even think about that too early like that. It was all restricted to the states, So it was all played within the states. And as time went by, each state developed its own competition, developed its own big clubs, big state clubs. Some of them later turned into big national clubs, national forces, not necessarily national support-wise, as we say, but as very important clubs like the clubs from Rio Grande do Sul, Internacional, Grêmio, clubs from Minas Gerais like Atlético and Cruzeiro. They went to build up the big picture of Brazilian football around the 1960s. when it all came into an integrated game, with national competitions coming up. But before this, in the first half of the century, it was mostly within the states that the competitions went through, and especially Rio and São Paulo, the most important states at that time, the strongest states, And Rio played a leading role too at that time. Winning the Rio championship, it's almost like winning a national championship at that time, as it did in São Paulo as well. So, each state in Brazil, it's like the size of an European country. So the state leagues are almost as big in size, as European leagues. The number of clubs, the number of players, the smaller clubs who feeded bigger clubs with talent and make it the engine run,
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm with you. But it's quite interesting. And again, I think it's good for our listeners, and to be fair, good for myself as well, to remember the sheer size and scale of Brazil. To the European mind is something that is almost incomprehensible, especially from a football perspective. I mean, in 2025, you're talking, it must be thousands of football clubs playing within the different pyramids within each state. It's just absolutely insane to think about. So going back to the early days of football, travel for a lot of these football clubs, the money involved would have been enough to make them fold 4 or 5 times over. Like, it just wasn't an option. But it's also, I've always enjoyed this idea that winning your state championship was akin to winning like a national championship, and that's just how it operated for a time. It's very insular, and it's something that, again, we don't really see a lot of in the modern day. I know that state championships are still a thing within Brazil, and we'll maybe talk about that a little bit later on, how long Brazilian seasons can actually be. But it's just really fascinating that, you had your state, you had your internal state league, and that's what you stuck to. And of course, like elsewhere in Europe, a lot of these football clubs came up from different sporting institutions like cricket clubs and rowing clubs and athletic clubs and things like that. So there's always been a lot of crossover. And then, as we know, football really takes over. So in terms of Flamengo, where do they fit into this context that you've given us?
Well, Flamengo, you mentioned other sports. In fact, many Brazilian clubs are not only football clubs, Flamengo has also, it's in the club rules. The club has to have a rowing team until this day. The club never should abandon the rowing, it's obliged to have a rowing team by the laws of the club. Flamengo still have to have a rowing team. But we have basketball teams too, by the way, which are South American champions.
Nice.
Of basketball. And the fans go to the basketball matches. We had a volleyball team. We had a lot of sports. Until the 1960s, 70s, we have many of athletics team, many famous Brazilian athletes at the time. So it's not just about football. It's like having many sports inside the club. Just like in Germany, it's something like that. That is also in Portugal, also Benfica and Porto, they have their own hockey teams, the other sports. In Brazil, some of the clubs are like this too. And Flamengo is a leading club in also other sports, nationally.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I can't remember which episode it was we spoke about it, but we were talking about how many clubs in Europe are also multi-sports organisations, and we were kind of discussing this idea that, you see it in Eastern Europe quite a lot, where ultras are banned from a football match. They'll then go and support their club at a basketball game, or they'll turn up to do that anyway. And that's when we talk about this idea that it's never really about football, but it's about the badge. It's about what the club represents, what the colours represent, and what the badge means to different people.
Yes.
And it's exactly the same for Flamengo,
Yeah, football in Flamengo started in 1911, around the Christmas 1911, when players unhappy with some internal issues with Fluminense, they left Fluminense and they were looking for a place to found a new club or to do anything else to keep playing football. And some of the Fluminense football players were rowers for Flamengo. One of them, they said, hey, let's go to Flamengo. We can build up a football team there if they accept us. Well, I think I talked to people there and, we arranged something about that. And Flamengo accepted. The guys from rowing didn't accept all that much at first. But then they saw the team start winning, and it was okay to share the club with other sports too. So it became football at that time, right at that time, football was getting popularity in Brazil. In 1910s in 1990, Brazil win the South American Championship in Rio, beating Uruguay in the final. So from then on, football was already a popular sport. Yeah, and Flamengo played a part in this too, as some other clubs. And Flamengo team already in the 1910s, 1920s, a very successful club at that time, at that point. In the 1920s, Flamengo is the club who won most titles in Rio during that decade. 1920, 21, 25, 27, 4 titles. In the 30s, it's some kind of a hard period for Flamengo. But on the other hand, it's a very decisive period because during that time, during that decade, Flamengo builds its own stadium, which it used to until the construction of Maracanã in 1950, the Gávea Stadium. Flamengo first played that in 1938. It was around that time that Flamengo really opened up the stores to black players because it was really here and there, there's a player here who could be considered black according to Brazilian standards, but not at that time, but in the 30s, there was a president in Flamengo, a chairman called José Bastos Padilha, and he really opened the door to the club to black players. He brought many talented black players from abroad, players like Leônidas, which we used to play in the 1938 World Cup, and Domingos da Guia, the central defender, the magnificent central defender, who had played for Boca Juniors in Argentina, in Nacional in Uruguay, played in Brazilian clubs too, played in the 1938 World Cup. He's arguably the greatest Brazilian central defender of all time. And from then on, Flamengo was already a popular club, a real popular club. There are some researches in the 20s, not all that reliable, but they always put Flamengo among the most popular clubs.
Yeah.
But in the 30s, it was like uphill, It's a real defining period for the club. It's when you have the most popular player in Brazil, which is Leônidas, and he's a massive success to people. He's the most celebrated person in Brazil, and he plays for Flamengo. And he goes to the 1938 World Cup as a Flamengo player, and he's the leading goal scorer at the World Cup, and he's voted the best player of the World Cup in France. He's celebrated by the French press, and he's a Flamengo player. And people started to admire the club coming from the player, and some came to admire the club, to support the club because of its party nature, It's like Flamengo fans, I'll say it again, until very recently, now I think it's starting to turn, but has always marked by this kind of party thing, It's like we're the most happy fans in Brazil. It's like it's a state of spirit. Flamengo, I think it's most identified to that kind of Rio spirit. Other clubs are somewhat straight-faced about Flamengo and about themselves, but Flamengo fans are really enjoy the club, going to a match, watching the team, regardless if it wins or lose. If it's winning, it's like, well, you're about to be world champions, Everything is overhyped, overexposed, over everything. It's a national club, so people really get insane about the things sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it. I love it, though. It's Flamengo, by the sounds of things, is a mindset. It's a world outlook that people, when they think about it, think of happiness and joy and partying. It's like you said there, no matter if you're visiting a club 3 divisions away from Flamengo in another part of Brazil, or whether you're going to the Club World Cup final, everyone's in the same mood. And I think there's something really special in being able to say that that's how you follow your football club. Especially, being from Scotland, where a lot of our fans are absolutely miserable, myself included, about how our football can be played sometimes, the types of grounds, the fact the weather's often quite drab and boring and grey. I think there's a lot to be said for people who go and follow their football club with every ounce of joy that they have, and it's as much a cultural thing as it is everything else. But I think it's fair to say that Flamengo hit the ground running after they founded. One thing that I did want to ask you, Emmanuel, was you were mentioning there about Flamengo eventually opening up more to black players. Was this something that was widespread in Brazilian football at the time, or was this something confined to just a few clubs?
Well, football turned professional in Brazil in 1933, around that time. It's the first professional league in Rio. It's came about that time, 1933. Rio has a huge black population, the city, but mostly in the suburbs. And the city really caught the fever, the football fever. It went all through the city, in the richest places to the suburbs, to the distant suburbs, to the poorer parts of the town. Everyone got the fever. So there are many clubs in the suburbs with black players at that time. But many clubs were one another segregation for a long time. But it started to open. You see pictures of clubs in 1918, 1919, 1920, starting to slowly having black players in the picture. When it came to professionalism, then it was like, now everyone can come about. So let's open up and see what happens. Because everyone knew black players had talent. But it was like some secret weapon, which not everyone was allowed to use. So when they did start to play a bigger part in the leading clubs, it was a revolution in Brazilian football. Flamengo in itself were going to a very dry period between 1927 to 1939. It's the longest dry period in the club's history when it comes to winning the league, 12 years. At that time, it was in the middle of that time the club started to using black players. It also attracted a huge popularity to the club because there were many black fans too. They went to see the club and see the players. And in the 30s, some pictures you see the squad, there's about 8 black players in the starting 11. It was a huge influence to the popularity of the club. From then on, it was things got bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I understand. No, that's okay. I was just curious to know what the situation, what the context and sort of feeling around Brazil was at that time. Obviously, we spoke on our episode with Ronnie Blasca about the Portuguese colonial machine and how they used players from parts of the Portuguese Empire.
Yes.
And how different national identities and things like that came into it. But you mentioned there Flamengo's barren spell in the 30s. Now, if my maths is correct, by my count, since 1939, Flamengo have won 59 trophies. 33 Campeonato Cariocãs, which was effectively the National League at that time, of the Campeonato Rio de Janeiro. They've won a Copa Rio.
We won 14, 15, 20, 21, 25, 27, 39, and then 42, 43, 44, 53, 54, 55, 63, 65, 72, 74, 78, and then 79, there was 2 championships on the same year, and we won both.
Incredible.
And then we won 81, 86, 91, 96, 99, 2000, 2001, 2004, 7, 8, 9, 11, 14, 17, I guess, yes. Most recent are the hardest to remember. When you specialize in history, you can remember clearly the oldest ones, but now the recent ones not so.
The last 5 are 2019, 2020, 2021,
yes,
2024,
exactly.
2025. So Flamengo have won a trophy in at least 2 years of every single decade since the 1930s, which is incredible consistency. They've also won in that time an Intercontinental Cup, 3 Copa Libertadores, a Copa Sudamericana, and a number of other smaller unofficial tournaments, along with 7 Serie A titles from the founding of Serie A in 1980. I mean, it's absolutely incredible the dominance that Flamengo have had over Brazilian football since they founded. And obviously, through the years, there's been different ups and downs for the clubs. Of course, that's going to be the same with every single football club that you have. But I mean, Flamengo are one of the most decorated football clubs in the world for a reason. It's just incredible when you look at the numbers like that.
Well, the Libertadores Cup, which is the equivalent to the Champions League European Cup, Flamengo was the third Brazilian club to win it. The first one was Santos with Pelé in the 60s, then Cruzeiro in 76, but they didn't win the World Club Cup. And Flamengo went to win in 1981, which was earlier than most of the leading clubs in Brazil. And Flamengo also won 8 Brazilian championships. People may say 7, but in fact, there is a title it's ever talk about in Brazil that, due to disputes with the National Confederation, they don't consider Flamengo as a champion. But everyone who saw that championship at that year, they cannot deny Flamengo is the real winner of the championship in 1987. We've won the Brazil Cup, which started in 1989. We won it 5 times. And we won a few other cups, Mercosul Cup, International Cup from South America, the Recopa, which is the equivalent to European Super Cup, some other cups. Yeah,
Some. Many, yeah. No, I understand. It's just incredible having honestly, for our listeners, go and have a look on Flamengo's Wikipedia page and just scroll down to the honours. Their honours has a separate Wikipedia page in its own right. It's just amazing when you look at some of these tournaments that they've played over time as well. But to have such remarkable consistency and success threaded into the history of the club is incredibly rare, but it's also something that's incredibly special as well. And of course, these victories, these successes will have led to there being so many historic and special moments for Flamengo over the decades coming into the modern day that the fans can speak about, and that, of course, you yourself, Emmanuel, are dedicated to studying.
Yes, well, Flamengo has always have great teams, In the 40s, we had a great team in the first half of the 40s, when we had Domingos da Guia, the central defender I told before, and we had Zizinho, which was a master of midfield player. He played in the 1950 World Cup, and Brazil lost to Uruguay in the final. But he was an outstanding player. He was Pelé's idol.
That tells you all you need to know.
Yes, and he played for Flamengo from 1939, from the very end of 1939 until the start of 1950. So the entire decade he played for Flamengo. He's very celebrated, could be more celebrated. If Brazil won the 1950 World Cup, he would be huge in Brazil too, and more known outside Brazil, in Europe, especially in Latin America. He's reasonably new. In Argentina, people who praise the Argentinian football in the 40s also say, well, but Brazil had Zizinho, which was a remarkable player. But talking about interwar in Europe, it wasn't the same as Brazil, because the competitions didn't stop here. It just went on normally, because the whole part of the war was mostly it was happening in Europe. But Brazil, things got going here. It's kind of a lost decade, because we didn't have World Cups in 1942 and 46. So Brazil couldn't show these players to the world. I think that's the reason why they were not celebrated outside Brazil, mostly, because they're very special players. And Flamengo had other remarkable team too in the 1950s. Another team who won 3 championships in a row, 53, 54, 55. We had a remarkable manager in Paraguay, Manuel Solis, which was a former manager of the Paraguayan national team. He managed Boca Juniors also a few years before. And he was one of the most, the 1958 Brazilian World Cup side is the 4-2-4 tactics, Flamengo has been playing like that, like 5 years earlier, when we won the 3 championships in a row. We were playing modern football at the time, but the world didn't see it, because it was the other side of the Atlantic. This Flamengo team of the 50s, played a huge part in shaping the 1958 Brazil side. 4 players from Flamengo played in that World Cup. One of them until the end, which was Zagallo, the left winger. It was a different kind of football we were playing, especially within Brazil at the time, under Solis. It was a very special team, which goes really under the radar, It's not so well known. Even nationally, people don't talk about that team. But it's a very special team. I think it should be more talked about, more written about. Maybe, who knows, I will do something about that soon.
definitely should. I suppose that's part of your role as a historian and someone who archives these things. Is that you find these teams, you look at their achievements, and then you decide how much you're going to speak about them. But I mean, you're right in saying, and I think it would probably be fair to say that it wasn't until the Intercontinental Cup really started to take shape that people from Europe really started to get their heads around what teams from South America were all about. And that's when the world really started to open their eyes to not just the type of play, but also the type of players, the types of flair, the types of technique that were on show within South America as well. And that's when interest in football in Brazil and Argentina and elsewhere really started to take off. But you mentioned some of the great Flamengo teams, the 40s, the 70s especially, but also like the team of the 1980s as well. And from 1980 to 1990, Flamengo won a trophy in at least 7 seasons across the entire decade. One of them was an Intercontinental Cup. One of them was a Copa Libertadores. Like, it's insane the amount of good teams that Flamengo have had over the years. Some really, really exciting footballers.
Yeah, 1981 was to Flamengo what 1967 is to Celtic fans. It's the golden generation. I started talking about the team from the 40s and the 50s because everyone in Brazil talk about the team from the 80s. It's the greatest ever Flamengo side. And even though lately we've kind of slowly matching in terms of cups, we have been winning a lot recently since 2019. But there's no term of comparison with the team from the 80s. They are real legends of the club. The 11 which played against Liverpool in Tokyo, December 13, 1981, everyone in Brazil can say that team. People who saw that team and even people who were born before that time have always knew that 11, Raul, Leandro, Marinho, Moser, Júnior, Andrade, Adílio, Zico, Tita, Nunes, Lico. On paper, it was 4-3-3, but in fact it wasn't. It was more like a 4-5-1 or 4-4-2 maybe. It was crammed with talent. The fullbacks was something else. The midfielders were pure class. And Zico is God to Flamengo fans. People here, Flamengo fans, say they celebrate Christmas at March 3, which is Zico's birth date. It's Christmas for us, March 3. One famous Flamengo writer has written many books about Flamengo. He says, you see all this? Zico created all that. The trees, the birds, the sky, it was all due to Zico. He created all that. and it's a fabulous side. I think many players from that side are not necessarily well known enough in Europe. People know Zico, people know Júnior for the 1982 World Cup. Some people know Moser because he played for Marseille at that time, in the end of the 80s, started the 90s, and played for Benfica too. Some people would know about Nunes because he scored twice in the final against Liverpool. But there were some special players in there. Leandro played in the 19 World Cup, and he didn't get the credit. He is a very special player. I think people don't realize how big he is in Brazilian football. If you ask any Brazilian, the greatest fullbacks in Brazil, the greatest right backs in Brazilian history, most of them will say Leandro. Falcão, the 1982 World Cup player, said that Leandro was the most gifted of all that players, but he played at the right back, so people wouldn't see it all that much. But he could play with both feet. People talk about Andreas Brehme. Leandro was like that too. He could kick with both right foot and left foot. He could play central defender. He could play midfielder. He could play winger. He could do anything. He was a pure class, a football brain. And sadly, his knees got not very good since from the start of his career, actually. But he was 25 when he moved from right back to centre back because his knees wouldn't allow him to come and go, to raid down the line, the right wing, So he moved to the center back. He had to run a little less all the time, And he hung up his boots. He was 31, a relatively young age. So
yeah, it's a real shame though, and I think again it speaks to the sheer ability of this team that people know so much about them in this way. But it's like you said, not a lot of people from Europe could speak about them to the same depth that you do, and it's quite interesting. And, there could be a whole other episode in itself, the dynamic between South America and Europe and the perceptions and things,
Talking about each player of that 11, Raul was an outstanding keeper. He was the oldest player of that team. He was around his 40s. He played until 39 or 40 years old when he retired. And he was the type of Italian goalkeeper, like Zoff. He was a very calm keeper and very relied on positioning. He couldn't care less keeper, He didn't make a splash of his saves, but he was perfect at quiet keepers. He was very safe. He already had a long career with Cruzeiro, in which he won the 1976 Libertadores. So he played a very important part in winning again with Flamengo in 1981. And he was a very experienced keeper. He could have played in the World Cup with Brazil. He could have been in the 92 World Cup squad, at least. Marinho was a very tall centre-back, but he was really fast, and he could be excellent in heading and aerial balls. But he was indeed very fast, in spite of his size. But he had some bravery too. He was a young player. He was the youngest player that side. His greatest time in Flamengo would come later on, like 1984, 1985, when he went into the national team. Junior, it was another fullback who could have been a midfielder. And in fact, when he came back to Flamengo in 1989, he would play as a midfielder. And he would win another national championship in 1992 as a midfielder. I'd like to emphasize two players from the midfield. One is Andrade, defensive midfielder. He played like a holding position in front of the defense, but he was a very calm player, very good at passing, has a very good shooting from mid-size, from outside of the box. But he was very, very classy too. And then there was another player which was fantastic, who left us last year, which was Adilio, the number 8. Outstanding technique and skills. He came from a ghetto, and he brought up in the club playing futsal, which indoor soccer, and he developed his skills there with Flamengo before turning to football itself, to the field. And he was a very talented player. It's really strange how he won only one cap, international cap for Brazil, which was in March 1982 on the eve of the World Cup finals in the friendly against Germany, West Germany at the Maracanã. And he set up the goal by Junior, but he would never be called again. I don't know why. It's unexplainable to me. Flamengo was like his family. He lived just nearby the club, so until the end of his life, he would come to the club every day. He was a club guy. He was a guy linked to his roots. Wonderful player, wonderful person. There was other players, but, I've written about this side, even in English sometimes. I think these are the players I'd like to highlight. Again, people from Europe haven't seen enough of Zico as we've seen here in Brazil. Most of his goals, most of his brilliant plays in Brazilian football are not so regularly shown in Europe. So you've seen then that World Cups or Udinese, he did far more than that in Brazil. The far more special tricks, great goals and all that stuff. A fabulous player.
Absolutely incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, there's so much that can be said about that team from the 80s, so much that they accomplished and so much that they did for the Flamengo support. But, Flamengo have continued being successful into the modern day, but the landscape of football, obviously across the world, but in Brazil in particular, has changed quite a lot in recent years. And Flamengo did make it to the Club World Cup final only, within a handful of years ago. So they are still being a successful club, but it's been a different kind of success since the 80s and into the modern day. Obviously, this will be around the time that you started following the club as well. It's been an interesting time for Flamengo in terms of trophies since that team of the 80s, but there's still been many.
Yes, it's a very special time. But, the noughties were a very hard time for Flamengo. The 90s, and from 1993 to 2009, there was hardly reasons to celebrate. It was a very hard period for the club, financial issues. The club has lost its credibility to attract players and to form competitive teams. It has been a really hard time. And then in 2013, 2012, actually, a new board went into the club. There were elections, and a new president was elected. And along with him, there was a group made up by people with another mindset to really professionalize the club. So all of this, which is happening now, financial highs and, a lot of titles and a lot of bringing players from Europe, developing young talent to sold them to Europe for fortunes. It was all the result of this movement. We've been like 3 or 4 years of very substandard teams, because we had to pay debts. So we couldn't attract bigger players. We had to have a cheap side just to keep things going, trying not to get relegated. Luckily, we managed to do quite well. But around 2017, 2018, things started to turn good. And then 2019 was the peak. Then on, it all came about. In 2019, we won the Brazilian Championship again. And then we won the Libertadores Cup after a long wait, which was 38 years. So we won it again in 2022, the National Championship again in 2020, which the championship actually only ended in February 2021 due to the pandemics. But we keep going. We won the Brazilian Cup last year. And in 2022 also, we won a lot of cups. There were years like 2021 or 2023 when we couldn't manage to win anything. But on the other hand, there were some other 4 years, 2019, 2022, which were loaded with trophies, It gave a real good average of wins. It's a special phase too. A lot of players are celebrated by the fans, identified to the club, even though they are not raised in the club. Flamengo was always marketed to be a club who formed his own players. Zico started with Flamengo, Junior started with Flamengo, Leandro started with Flamengo. A lot of players from national team who played abroad also played in Flamengo youth level, like Júlio César, the goalkeeper, Juan, the center back from Brazil, Adriano from Inter Milan, Brazil too. All these players came from Flamengo youth ranks. Vinicius Junior now at Real Madrid. In the 1987, when we won the national championship, there was like 4 or 5 players who went on to play in the 1994 World Cup. Bebeto, Zinho, Leonardo, Jorginho, which wasn't a Flamengo youth player, but came to Flamengo at a very young age, like 2021. All these players played in the side which won the national championship in 1987. Aldair, the center back too. It was a very special moment too. And Flamengo has this, it's famous for bringing up a lot of young talent from their own youth ranks.
Yeah, it's an incredible football club. I think that much is obvious for all the success and everything that they've done for football in Brazil, as well as the national team, the players that they've produced, the attention that they've brought to Brazilian football across the international stage. It's just an incredible history and an incredible thing to be able to say that you've done. And it's also an incredible thing to be able to say that you're a part and a fan of that football club as well. But I mean, the things in football in Brazil have changed quite recently. I think it was maybe only 4 or 5 years ago where league rules were changed to allow some more private investment to come into clubs in Brazil. But I mean, since then, you saw some really historic clubs really start to fall away. Santos been relegated, Vasco da Gama been relegated, Grêmio have been relegated. Fluminense at the beginning, mid-season last year, were really struggling at the bottom of the table. Corinthians as well, not that far above them. So a lot of the clubs in Brazil that people would be considered to be the big hitters have really, really struggled in recent years because of these changes, but not Flamengo. Flamengo have managed to stay the course incredibly and actually kind of do a little bit better from it. There's been a lot of things that have happened in Brazil in recent years which would suggest that a lot of the older clubs, if they don't start to catch up and modernise, they might fall even further down the divisions.
Well, the relegation thing that you have to have in mind is like Brazilian National Championship started in 1971. Some people would say it started before that. And even the National Confederation, the CBF, would say it started before that. But no, it starts really in 1971. Promotion relegation only really got underway in Brazil in 1988. Until then, there was a lot of a lot of things involved. There was a time when clubs we used to play the national championship due to the record on the state championship. Like São Paulo, for instance, had 6 clubs from São Paulo. So if any of the big clubs lower than 6th place, they wouldn't play the first division. They play in the second-rate championship. So if relegation, in promotion and relegation, having it in Brazilian championship since the start, maybe we could have other clubs being relegated more times earlier. It's a very new thing for Brazilian football because promotion and relegation itself, it's a very new thing. But yes, Flamengo managed to keep it up. As a fan, I've seen a lot of many battles against relegation, especially in the noughties, 2002, 2005. There was a hard time, but we always had the great escape, the very important win in the last round, We even have players who we celebrate till today because of their winning goals in very important matches to avoid drop. So it was part of our history too. It was a hard time every club goes through. Since 2017, Flamengo stopped really getting involved with relegation and relegation battles and went to aim higher, I think we came 3rd in 2017 and 2nd in 2018. And from then on, it was like all the time, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, sometimes 4th, but never lower than that. It was all due to this structure the club has developed in recent years. We've built a very interesting training center, and we managed to attract players again, big players from Brazil and from the other clubs in Brazil and from abroad, from players from Europe. Started to get interested in returning to Brazil and joining Flamengo. So it was all due to that. And the whole thing got bigger. The more money coming into the club from TV, from sponsorship, from a lot of things. Because Flamengo, as a national club, it's the greatest mark. Everything that happens with Flamengo, the mass following of Flamengo, it's a big screen. It's like something like that. Everything that involves Flamengo involves big money. Some time ago, a lot of people used to make a lot of money selling Flamengo merchandise, So the club started to doing that too. And 2 years ago, they built a museum at the club, so they sold tickets, and it's a real success. A lot of people from all over Brazil come to Rio to visit Flamengo, to watch the team play, even once in a year. It's a real mass club. A lot of things involved. It all brings money to the club and brings all these things involved.
Exactly. And it's just what you were saying there. What I had in mind was it's the real mark of a successful and resilient football club that despite almost facing relegation, they can pull themselves back out of it, they can rebuild from it, and they can go on and become successful once again, back to the standards that you would expect of them. Just before we finish up, Emmanuel, there was one thing that I really wanted to ask you and one thing that I'd really like to find out, so please feel free to speak about this as much as you'd like. Obviously, what we see in Europe in terms of fan culture in Brazil and across all of South America is incredibly passionate fans, recibimientos, tifos, banners, confetti, all these different things that really kind of show how special fan culture and supporter culture in South America actually is. But tell us a little bit about the fan culture of Flamengo, the identity of the supporters and the club. But what being a supporter in Brazil actually means, what following Flamengo actually means to you. Tell us about that, and tell us about some of the intense rivalries and intense expressions that come out when you're following Flamengo, because, from everything you said so far, it's an incredibly special football club. And I think it would be remiss of me not to ask what it was like following them and what they mean to you.
Well, Flamengo in the stadium, it's like Flamengo was always have been popular for its its way of celebrating itself, celebrating its own fans. Back in the 1940s, it was the first club to put a band playing in the stadium. In 1942, a Flamengo fan by himself, nothing related to the club, said, I want to make a band, a brass band to take into the stadium to play, to support Flamengo as they play. Like they made some banners and stuff like Go Flamengo, So it became a commonplace in Brazil because of the Flamengo fans, the bands in stadium. A lot of stadiums in Brazil, you could hear a band playing. Even today, some stadiums. And this is a tradition, a cultural tradition in football that started with Flamengo. And they wore the club shirts at the fans. And at a time when people went to football matches like wearing suits, and hats and things like that, they would go with the club shirt on and playing and shouting and supporting the team. It was a revolution about supporting at that time. It was a band called Charanga, which was, it still exists. The band still exists. Its founder died in 1976, but they keep on with the tradition, and the band still exists. So sometimes you can meet them at the club and at parties in the club and any celebration like players, a player birthday. I remember in 1992 when we won the championship, there was a kind of a trademark about fans, involving fans at the stands, at the Maracanã stands. There was a popular movement with the hands, like people clapping hands over their heads. It was a beautiful spectacle to see, to watch. Everyone, they said, "Wow, look at what they're doing." The fans. It's a very, very beautiful thing to do in the stands. It was kind of a hand ballad. With the fans doing a bit like what they done in Iceland, but in a faster pace. Of course, it took a more rhythm things. But many things were introduced by Flamengo fans regarding to rivalries. There were strong rivalries with the three other big clubs in Rio, which are still the big clubs, because there was another one of the big clubs, which was America, which since the 70s, the 80s had become a declining force. But Vasco, Fluminense, and Botafogo are the main rivals. They're all from Rio. People would say there was intercity rivalries with other clubs like Palmeiras and Atlético Mineiro, but Palmeiras is really because of the moment. It's like a phase, because the two clubs who are winning everything. So it became sort of a rivalry, but I think we consider we're more state-wise in terms of rivalry.
Yeah.
We are more stick to our state rivals. The rivalries go higher within the state, not against teams from other cities or the other states. So the three greatest rivalries are Vasco. I think Vasco first is the biggest rival, and then some people would say Fluminense, some people would say Botafogo, and some people will even put Fluminense ahead of Vasco, but I wouldn't say so. In the 90s, it was like banging Flamengo versus Vasco. I think it's the biggest rivalries. Vasco recently has become sort of a free-fall team, so it's not as bitter as it used to be. Today, I say Botafogo is a little more bitter between the three rivals. In the later years, it has become the most bitter rivalry for Flamengo fans. But historically, I'd say Vasco.
That's quite interesting, actually. So what's the fan culture actually like for you and your fellow supporters? What's the identity of the fans? What's the identity of the club? It's the last question that I've got for you.
Well, I couldn't tell it properly because I don't live exactly in Rio. I live in a nearby city. So I don't go too often to the stadium. In fact, as Flamengo is a national club, most of its supporters from other states has never seen Flamengo play at the Maracanã because they can't afford traveling and buying a ticket and going to the city. I was raised in the state of Rio, but far away from the capital. So I used to watch the team from TV mostly. So I've been at the stadium a reasonable number of times. But there is something which is really part of communion between fans. I think it's, how could I say? It's like a family, 40 million people family, but people from all over the country. There was a old Flamengo motto which says, whenever you find a Flamengo fan, you find a friend. If you're from Rio and you go to any other state and you find a Flamengo fan, immediately it starts to ignite the talk about Flamengo. You recognize on the other person one of your own. It's belonging. You can talk about belonging in a neighborhood in a city, in a small city, in a state. But Flamengo is like belonging to something nation-wise. It's like belonging to something too big to measure, I think.
Yeah.
It's very special to be part of this huge family. It's like another country within a country, which is Brazil. We say here we are the Flamengo fans and the Rainbow fans, which is all the other clubs against Flamengo, all the other colors against Flamengo. Yeah, it's something like that. It's a very big thing, you know. It's a very huge club, really.
I think you're right in saying that it's something that you can't really measure. It's something that is bigger than the sum of its parts. And when you're talking about the Flamengo supporters being another nation, you know, that has a lot of implications in itself when we talk about heritage and identity. And I think, though, that's what Flamengo is. It speaks to itself as being something bigger than football, something bigger than sports, something in many ways bigger than Brazil as well. And I think this is what is impressive about the club and the success that it's managed to create, is that it still has a fan base, not just in Brazil, not just in its own area, but across the world. And that's huge. It's huge to have fans that have never been able to visit for different reasons. It really speaks to how big you are as a football club. And I think, and I hope that's what we've got across to our listeners today, just how special Flamengo actually is, and the sheer scale of the club, the sheer scale of the club's history and success, and how storied it actually is. But this has been a fantastic chat. Emmanuel, is there anything else that you'd like to add just before we finish up for today?
Well, I've mentioned the fact that it's like a country within the country itself. We call ourselves nation, nação rubro-negra, which is red and black nation. It's really like being part of a different country within the country itself. We know what we're talking about when we talk to each other.
Yeah, you have all the same reference points, and it's just one big family being able to say these things to each other, knowing what each other is. I think that's really special and really unique.
Yeah, we share it all. We share the same idols, the same views sometimes on the club itself. How things should go, how things should not go, and you can be anywhere in the country, and you could find the Flamengo fan anywhere in the country, and then it clicks immediately, you know. And it's really national, because there was reports that the fans that live in the north of the country, you know, near the Amazon, which they go from one city to another. They take days to find a place with a TV to watch the matches. They travel to watch the matches on TV. It's absurd, but it's fantastic, because how much fanatic they are related to the club, the size of things they do to follow Flamengo, even when they could not be present at the stadium. But what they do, what things they manage to do to keep up with the team.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's the thing that makes you a passionate supporter at the end of the day. And when you support a club like Flamengo, all you can do is want to go and support them in those kind of manners. It's absolutely incredible, the kinds of things that we've learned today, the types of things I've learned today, and I hope all of our listeners have enjoyed it. But that'll do us for today. Emmanuel, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast to talk about all things Flamengo. It's been an absolutely incredible episode, and I'm really delighted we finally got to have this conversation. Of course, thank you very much to all of our listeners who have tuned in once again. If there's any questions that you have about this episode, or if you would like to suggest an episode yourself, please do get in touch. You can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk as well. For now, though, Emmanuel, say goodbye.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure really talking about my club, talking about Flamengo, talking about Brazilian football itself. Talking about football in English, it's a really new experience to me, and I like it very much. I enjoyed it very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much, and goodbye to everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, I know you've done absolutely brilliantly for the first time you've spoken about football in English. You've done really, really well, and I appreciate you coming on. It's goodbye from me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.